there, and welcome to the first episode of Witchmas, which is something that's going to be happening throughout the entire month of December, meaning there's going to be one Witcher video every single day of December. Yes, really. If you've been around my channel long enough, you probably already know that I used to be very Witcher focused. I'm not anymore. If you want to look at my current stuff, just look at literally just a few videos before this one, and you'll know what I'm normally like. But this month, because I just get questions about doing Witcher videos every single day, this month is for you, all of my Witcher friends who are still hanging around. I'm so sorry. We're just going to talk about The Witcher for a full month. In case you're interested, we're also playing the Farewell of the White Wolf at some point on my stream, which is on twitch.tv/Jinzy, so you can follow me there if you'd like. In my newer videos, I tend to add sketches to pretty much every single one. I was going to do that for the Ciri videos as well, which is the only big series I'm doing. All the other ones will be much shorter. I even bought a Ciri wig, which is an old lady wig apparently, but we're not gonna do any sketches for the Ciri series. Because honestly, it's a little bit of a dark story, so you are warned. Ciri's story's not happy, but a Merry Christmas in advance, and let's just jump right into it.
Once upon a time, in a kingdom far, far away, there lived the Cintrian royal family, led by the fierce lioness of Cintra, Calanthe. One day, Calanthe hosted a banquet to celebrate the betrothal of her daughter Pavetta to one of the men attending. But Calanthe had to be careful, for she knew that her late husband, King Rugner, had secretly vowed to give Pavetta's hand in marriage to a cursed man Calanthe had never met, because of the law of surprise. And so, Calanthe invited a witcher, Geralt of Rivia. He would stop the cursed man from taking her beautiful daughter. But she had not anticipated Pavetta's feelings in her plans. Pavetta loved the cursed man, whose name was Junie. Not only that, but Pavetta was already pregnant with his child. A child that, through the law of surprise, was now promised to Geralt of Rivia. That child, of course, was Cirilla of Cintra. She would be bound to our Witcher through the bonds of destiny until such a time that destiny had been fulfilled. But fate would not be kind to this young girl. Firstly, her father, Junie, was not really Junie. He was, in truth, Emhyr va Emreis, rightful emperor of Nilfgaard. When his father was overthrown by a usurper, they turned Emhyr into a hedgehog creature in an attempt to force his father to legitimize the usurper's rule. When he refused, Emhyr was set loose into the world, beset by dogs, but the hedgehog curse was flawed. At night, this 13-year-old boy would turn into a human again, and on the advice of a friend to the Empire, he left for Cintra where he found Pavetta. He did not love her, but knew that she might be a way to break his curse. And while it did exactly that, he did not expect to have a child soon to be coveted by many. After Ciri's birth, Emhyr was approached by the sorcerer Vilgefortz, an evil man with designs of his own. He wanted Ciri, and he intended to use Emhyr to get her. He showed Emhyr a prophecy, one of many versions implying that Ciri's bloodline would grow even stronger in her child. This particular one stated that the child of Ciri's child would rule the world. Vilgefortz persuaded Emhyr that he should be the one to beget this child with Ciri. He suggested incest. For the time being, however, Ciri was a very normal child, a mischievous brat who would spend her summers and winters on Skellige with her uncle Cregan Crate. She'd visit the Temple of Freya and gaze upon the Brisingamen. During winter, she would ice skate with the Skelliger kids. She was so good at their game of Salmon Leaper, a game where they'd compete to see who could jump over the biggest rock while on ice skates, that Hjalmar had to defend his title of champion by jumping over a rock that broke an arm, a leg, 4 ribs, and a good chunk of his face. And then she fell in love with that same Hjalmar. They even decided they would marry one another, much to the chagrin of Calanthe, who immediately took her back to Cintra.
But their joy would not last. Things were starting to look up for the loyalists in Nilfgaard, and Emhyr/Junie realized that he would have to return to Nilfgaard someday soon. But he had not forgotten about the prophecy. He wished to return with Ciri. But all of this would have to happen in secret, of course, because Junie was known as Ciri's father. So, to this end, Vilgefortz devised a plan. Junie would have to disappear, but not just Junie. Everyone. Pavetta, Ciri, they both had to die.
Their plan was to take all 3 people on a sea voyage and stage a disaster. Vilgefortz would pull the vessel into a magical whirlpool, killing everyone on the ship, while Emhyr, Pavetta and Ciri would remain in a secure room to save themselves. Of course, things did not quite turn out like that. Pavetta had caught wind of Emhyr's plan, and before they set sail, she had smuggled Ciri back on land, to Calanth. When Emhyr found out during the journey, they fought, and Pavetta fell overboard to her death. These events caused a rift between Emhyr and Vilgefortz, for obvious reasons, but for now, Ciri was safe, if without her parents. "Hail, Modron, princess," said Calanth in a cold and authoritative voice, without so much as a glance at the Jarl. Come here to me, Ciri." Her grandmother's hand was as strong and hard as a man's, her rings cold as ice. "Where is Eist?" "The king," stammered Crack, "is at sea, Modron. He is looking for the remains and the bodies since yesterday." "Why did he let them?" shouted the queen. "How could he allow it? How could you allow it, Crack? You're the Jarl of Skellige. No Drakkar is allowed to go out to sea without your permission. Why did you allow it, Crack?" Uncle Crack bowed his head even lower. "Horses!" said Calanth. "We're going to the fort, and tomorrow at dawn I am setting sail. I am taking the princess to Cintra. I will never allow her to return here. And you have a huge debt to repay me, Crack. One day I will demand repayment." "I know, Modron. If I do not claim it, she will do so." Calanth looked at Ciri. "You will repay the debt to her, Jarl. You know how." When Eisttuasach, Calanth's Skelliger husband, returned after looking for Ciri's parents at sea, their faces were gloomy, as was the feast that followed, during which the sea wolves of Skellige slowly got drunk in terrifying silence. They whispered of the Gjas Muir, the curse of the sea. Pavetta and Junie had been swallowed by a tempest which no one had foreseen. In the end, Ciri did not remember much about her parents, only that her mother had had long hair and she was always sad. But from this point on, Ciri would have a somewhat calm life again, for a little while at least. Geralt had not come to collect her. Although he had come to Cintra to look at her, he had rejected the law of surprise and turned his back on destiny. And with that, Ciri. But destiny would not turn its back on the pair. One day, Ciri was sent to Verdun to meet a potential future husband, Kistrin. She'd seen a portrait of Kistrin before, and he'd looked quite handsome. But he didn't look quite the same when she met him. You might say she'd been catfished. Not to mention, Kistrin didn't even want to marry Ciri. He'd fallen in love with a lady of the court, Alvina. So, Ciri decided that she'd simply leave. She'd convinced the squire of Knight Voimir to help her escape the castle, and so he did. Except for some reason, he thought it would be a good idea to take the path through Brokilon. Brokilon was Dryad territory, and none who enter may leave alive. So too, this poor squire, shot quite immediately upon nearing the forest. Ciri escaped into the forest herself, only to be found eventually by Geralt of Rivia and the Dryad Bren. Although they find her in the company of an Igern, a monster about to rip her to shreds. After saving her, Bran decides that Ciri will come with them to Duen Canel. Little girls lost in Brokilon were meant to become little dryads themselves, you see. Ciri would drink the magical water of Brokilon and leave her old life behind. She would forget even her name. Luckily, as Geralt was already on his way to Duen Canel, they traveled together, even though the Witcher would have much rather escorted Ciri back to Verdun.
Before running into Ciri in the forest, Geralt ran into a man called Freixenet at the wood's edge. Freixenet told him that he was looking for a princess in the woods, nothing more. Realizing that he'd found said princess wasn't hard, Ciri behaved precisely like a princess would. She was haughty and stuck up. She kept calling Geralt a peasant and threatening to have his head cut off. To which Geralt responded with, "Don't be such a brat," and the threat of belting her. Once Ciri dropped the "Don't you know who I am" card, however, Geralt and her got along quite well. Geralt even carried her on his back once her legs started hurting. Ciri herself wouldn't stop complaining about how she didn't want to marry Kistrin, saying that he was big, stupid, and ugly and had bad breath.
Ciri eventually got hungry, and Geralt shares his meager food with her. He even gave her both of his apples, which is quite a generous offer, resulting in a thank you from Ciri for saving her life, also, but she still doesn't want to marry Kistrin. "Don't wriggle, future princess of Verdun, ma'am." "I'm not going to be a princess," she muttered. Very well, very well. You won't be a princess. You'll become a hamster and live in a burrow." "No, I won't. You don't know anything." "Don't squeak in my ear, and don't forget about the strap." "I'm not going to be a princess. I'm going to be..." "Yes? What?" "It's a secret." "Oh yes, a secret. Splendid." He raised his head. "What is it, Bran?" The Dryad had stopped. She shrugged and looked at the sky. "I cannot go on," she said softly. "Neither can you, I warrant, with her on your back, Gwynblade. We shall stop here. It will darken soon." At this point, Geralt did not yet know that Ciri was from Cintra. As far as he knew, she told him her parents were dead, drowned at sea. But she did have a grandmother, and Geralt assumed that the court was simply trying to get rid of an unimportant princess as quickly as they could. Even so, he felt bad that she would likely die a Dryad in the war for Brokilon, the fate of all little girls who wander into Duan-Canel. He lay down beside the little girl and covered her with his jacket. "Sleep," he said. "Sleep, little orphan." "Orphan? Huh!" she growled. "I'm a princess, not an orphan, and I have a grandmama, and my grandmama is a queen, so you'd better be careful. When I tell her you wanted to give me the strap, my grandmama will order your head chopped off. You'll see." "Ghastly! Ciri, have mercy!" "Not a chance." "But you're a good little girl, and beheading hurts awfully. You won't say anything, will you?" "I will." "Ciri!" "I will! Afraid, are you?" "Dreadfully. You know, Ciri, you can die from having your head cut off." "Are you mocking me?" "I wouldn't dream of it." After Geralt tells Ciri and Bran a bedtime story about a clever cat who climbs a tree to avoid danger and a fox who thinks too much, they get up in the morning and finally make it to the border of Duan-Canel. There, Geralt gets blindfolded in order to stop him from remembering the way. Ciri does not get blindfolded and so volunteers to guide Geralt through the forest, which results in Geralt stumbling a fair bit.
Once in Duan-Canel, Ciri marvels at the homes made by the Dryads of living wood, and they also meet Freixenet again, who starts to get angry at Ciri almost immediately because she caused him so much trouble. Apparently Calanth had set her army on Verdun, thinking that Eärvel might have drowned Ciri in the fountain, as he is apparently wont to do. At this point, Geralt starts to realize that perhaps there's more to Ciri than he initially thought. Ciri, on the other hand, started to realize that Geralt was a witcher, and perhaps the witcher she was told of before, the one she was promised to.
As Ciri is taken away to cure her ongoing cold, Ethna has a short conversation about Ciri. Apparently the only reason she wasn't shot before is because her dryads had thought she was a pixie or a leprechaun. But now that she's here, Ciri would stay, regardless of how important she was in the human world. When Geralt returns to Ethna that night, she is sitting next to Ciri, brushing the girl's hair. They argue about Ciri staying again, and eventually, Ciri herself tells Lady Ethna that she'd like to stay with Geralt, because he was her destiny. This riles up Geralt more than it soothes him, wondering why Ethna toys with the girl so. After all, she had already decided that Ciri would become a dryad. But Ethna, wanting to prove to Geralt that destiny truly does exist, decides to put their bond to the test. She will give Ciri the water of Brokilon and asks Geralt to stay and watch, which he almost doesn't do, not wanting to watch Ciri suffer. And so Ciri drinks. And to Geralt's surprise, nothing happens. She simply restated her wish that she wanted to stay with Geralt. The Witcher was more stubborn than Ethna might have expected, however, as he thanks the Dryad for not giving Ciri the real water. So, to prove to him that the water was real, she invites Geralt to drink it as well. When he does, he finds that he may have misjudged Ethna. He immediately falls away into a vision of the banquet at Cintra, where he first bound his destiny to Ciri. Then his visit to Calanth, where he told her he would not take Ciri.
As Geralt falls unconscious, he hears Ethna say to Ciri that she is the only one who can save him before he is lost. Eventually, he wakes up outside of Brokilon next to Ciri. At this point, Geralt confirms for himself that she is in fact Ciri, his child surprise, And he thought that Ciri might have known this from the start as well, except she really didn't know until she heard that he was a witcher.
When they get on the road again, Geralt soon realizes that there's something special about Ciri. She seems to instinctively know which way is home, even when Geralt is entirely lost. And Geralt is happy enough to follow her. That is, until Ciri senses that the road he decides on next is wrong, somehow. The Witcher, ignoring Ciri's spidey senses, takes the road anyway, and of course they run into a group of soldiers who took up banditry rather than soldiering. They'd attacked a merchant caravan and now try to pretend that the Dryads were responsible. Geralt knew, of course, but so did Ciri. And Ciri did not intend to keep her mouth shut. The bandits, thinking they have the two outnumbered, didn't account for a Witcher, however. Geralt told Ciri to run as the fight breaks out, while he cuts down the bandits left and right. Halfway through, the Dryads decide to throw out a few arrows as well, as Mousesack the Druid casually rides up to greet Geralt and Ciri. Ciri, meanwhile, had clambered up a tree, just like the cat in Geralt's bedtime story. When she got down, Mousesack and Geralt had a serious heart-to-heart, while Ciri slept in Geralt's arms. Mousesack believes that the Witcher should take Ciri and go. Don't look back, just leave. He would even be willing to cover for him should Calanthe ask, because the Druid believes in destiny. And he believes that Ciri is bound to Geralt, but the Witcher still lacks that faith, and questions why Mousesack is even so sure of his thoughts. Geralt didn't intend to bring Ciri anywhere except home to Cintra. Mousesack simply answers that Ciri fell asleep when Geralt held her, that she whispers his name in her dream while her hand seeks his. But Geralt will not be persuaded, and leaves almost immediately. He rode slowly away, through heather as high as his stirrups, across the hillside leading into the valley towards the Black Forest. Geralt! He turned around. Ciri was standing on the brow of the hill, a tiny grey figure with wind-blown, mousy hair. "Don't go!" she waved. "Don't go!" she yelled shrilly. "Don't go!" "I have to," he thought. "I have to, Ciri, because I always do." "You won't get away!" she cried. "Don't go thinking that! You can't run away! I'm your destiny, do you hear?" There is no destiny, he thought. It does not exist. The only thing that everyone is destined for is death. Death is the other edge of the two-edged sword. I am the first edge, and the second is death, which dogs my footsteps. I may not expose you to that, Ciri. "I am your destiny!" The words reached his ears from the hilltop, more softly, more despairingly. He nudged the horse with his heel and rode straight ahead, heading deep into the black, cold and boggy forest, as though into an abyss, into the pleasant, familiar shade, into the gloom which seemed to have no end. A while later, Geralt meets with Yennefer during the celebration of Beltane. Yennefer, like Mousesack, seems to believe in destiny well enough, and she asks the Witcher to return to Cintra for his child's surprise, and not to give up this time. But when Geralt finds himself at a river near Cintra, he's met with people fleeing the other way. Juni, Ciri's father, now once again Emhyr va Emreis, had taken back the throne of Nilfgaard, but he did not have Ciri. His people hungered for war, however, and Emhyr decided he would kill two birds with one stone. He would attack Cintra, and in the chaos, abduct Ciri. It wasn't long after Ciri and Geralt's ordeal in Brokilon that Nilfgaard attacked. With Calanthe dead and the city burning, Cintrian knights were ordered to take Ciri to safety. Little did they know, this order was a setup by a Nilfgaardian spy within the Cintrian court. A Nilfgaardian by the name of Kaer Maver Difrin ep Kelach, among other people, was sent in to intercept the fleeing princess and take her to Nilfgaard. A job Kaer wasn't much pleased with, as he didn't think it would bring him a great deal of fame. But, by chance, his team was the one to run into the fleeing Ciri. They killed the man holding her and hoisted her upon a Nilfgaardian horse, only for that man to die as well, trapping Ciri under his dying horse. The flames rose ever higher as Kaer tried to get Ciri to come to him, but she was too afraid. So he dismounted and picked her up. When he did, she started to scream as she looked upon his large winged helmet, then tensed up and fainted. He wrapped her in a wet cloak and rode out through the fire, eventually finding a breach in the wall, putting them straight in the middle of the fleeing Cintrians. Kaer threw off his winged helmet and merged into the crowd until they reached a river. There he dismounted and washed the still shocked Ciri, only for them both to fall asleep from pure fatigue immediately after. When Kaer woke up, Ciri was gone. But she would never forget his winged helmet. They would haunt her nightmares from then on.
From then on, Ciri was by herself. She stole past the Nilfgaardian cohorts all on her own and fled the marauders, and she saw unspeakable things in her time alone near the villages. For 2 weeks, she roamed Transriver all on her own, trying to find food wherever she could, until she ran into another bunch of refugees with which she tracked for another month. Eventually, she was found by the druids, who would shelter her until a peasant woman decided that she would take care of her on her own. And she would do so for half a year, but half a year only, because that's when Geralt found her once again.
When Geralt heard of the sacking of Cintra, he'd given up hope on Ciri. The royal family had not survived, they'd said. And so he went on as he always had, traveling the land and slaying monsters. That is, until he met a man named Jurga, a man in dire need of a witcher. During said witcher business, however, Geralt was wounded so gravely that he could not travel on his own. So, Jurga took it upon himself to help him regain his health. Not to mention that Jurga had promised to pay Geralt through the law of surprise. You will give me whatever you find at home on your return, but did not expect. And so, they traveled to Jurga's home, only to hear that his wife had adopted a little girl with ashen hair. When the kids eventually show up, and Ciri notices Geralt, she breaks into a run immediately, shouting Geralt's name and hugging him tightly when they reached each other's arms. "Geralt!" the little girl repeated, clinging to the Witcher's chest. "You found me! I knew you would! I always knew! I knew you'd find me!" "Ciri," said the Witcher. Jurga could not see his face, hidden among the mousy hair. He saw hands in black gloves, squeezing the girl's back and shoulders. "You found me! Oh, Geralt, I was waiting all the time! For so very long! We'll be together now, won't we? Now we'll be together, won't we? Say it, Geralt! Forever! Say it!" "Forever, Ciri." "It's like they said, Geralt! It's like they said! Am I your destiny? Say it, am I your destiny?" Jurga saw the Witcher's eyes and was very astonished. He heard his wife's soft weeping, felt the trembling of her shoulders. He looked at the Witcher and waited, tensed, for his answer. He knew he would not understand it, but he waited for it and heard it. "You are something more, Ciri. Something more."
With Ciri and Geralt reunited at last, they travel together to Kaer Morhen, the Witcher's keep, where they will keep her safe for a time. She is constantly plagued by nightmares of the Fall of Cintra, and especially Kaer and his gigantic winged helmets, towering over her like a bird of prey.
At this moment in time, in the world at large, opinions are divided on whether or not Ciri is alive or dead. Of the opinion that she is alive, however, is a man named Riens, who starts following Ciri's trail quite quickly. What most did not know is that Riens was working for Vilgefortz. Vilgefortz wanted Ciri for his own. He was never interested in helping Emhyr take her. Emhyr was a pawn to him, as were so many others. His intentions for the young girl were revolting at best. He intended to forcibly impregnate her and then rip out her placenta once it formed, to use in unnamed experiments to gain the power of the elder blood for his own. The elder blood. Ciri's blood. I'll not delve into that vortex of intrigue for now, but only tell you what's important for Ciri's story. Cirilla of Cintra is the last in the line of Lara Doren ep Shiadal, an elf with extraordinary properties, for her blood held power. The power to open portals to other worlds, the power to travel through time and space itself, and that power now resided in Ciri's blood, more powerful than ever. Her child was meant to become even more powerful than even her, and this power is what Vilgefortz and so many others craved. This power is why she was hunted by evil beyond her scope. But her blood was not the only reason for her predicament. There were some who were unaware of the power her blood held. Some, like the kings and queens of the north, but they wanted her too. Some to marry her so they might legitimize their rule over Cintra. After all, the Cintrians still left would not accept anything less, and many of those Cintrians left were soldiers. Soldiers who would follow the newly married king of Cintra. Others did not mean to marry her, but simply kill her. Plainly to deny others the option of marriage at all. remove her from the playing field altogether. So, one group wanted Ciri for her blood, the other for her hand in marriage, and yet another wanted to see her dead. But for now, she resided quite safely in the Witcher's Keep, training daily in sword fighting on the Witcher's wildly dangerous training track, while eating the strange, strengthening herbs the Witchers fed her. However, that wasn't all she did. She was also prophesizing. Yes, this was another one of the properties her blood bestowed upon her. She could see the future, although not willingly. One night, she had drunk some white seagull, a mild Witcher's decoction, and had fallen into a trance. She had spoken nonsense, but then there was a second and a third time. Ciri had fallen during an exercise, and another trance followed with more nonsense. The third time, her trance happened after a nightmare, but this time she was understandable and foretold the future. She prophesied the deaths of Cohen, another Witcher, and Geralt. The Witchers didn't know it then, but she was entirely correct in her vision.
But Witchers are not mages. They don't know what to do when Ciri falls into a trance, and so they decide to ask for help from Triss Merigold. Triss travels to the Kaer Keep, and on her way there, already has a run-in with Ciri.
In the middle of one of Ciri's training courses, she finds Triss on her horse, on the way to Kaer They ride back to the keep together without much trouble until they make it to the moat of the keep. Here, Ciri starts speaking in a strange voice not her own. This isn't much of a vision, given that the predictions the voice makes do not come true. It's simply someone speaking through the girl. The voice tells Triss to return her to those to whom she belongs, but also uses one of Vilgefortz's often used lines, "You mistake the stars reflected in the surface of the lake at night for the heavens." I won't theorize too heavily in this story. However, I think I can say with some certainty that the voice speaking through Ciri would more likely be Avallac'h than Vilgefortz. Avallac'h won't show up until later on in this story, so I'll touch more on this by the end of Ciri's tale. For now, all you need to know is that someone, somewhere, is trying to find Ciri, and they're getting in her head in an attempt to do so. Once inside the Witcher's Keep, Triss finds that she does not agree with the Witchers in how they decided to treat Ciri. Firstly, she feels Ciri should have gone to the other Cintrians who fled from the war, but the Witchers scoff at this. The Cintrians had looked for Ciri, but did not find her. So this must have been destiny. When Triss ponders the situation late that night, after some unlikely scenarios pass through her mind, she finally realizes that it must have something to do with the vision-like state Ciri had at the bridge. Triss realized that Ciri was a source. Again, without getting too deep into the mechanics, a source is simply an exceptionally powerful mage. At least, they have the possibility of becoming exceptionally powerful. For now, untrained as she is, Ciri can only use her magic without knowing that she is. If she tried to cast even a simple spell, she wouldn't be able to. But if she got angry, lost control, that is when the magic happened. Not wanting to rush the Witchers, Triss takes the next day to simply spend some time with Ciri. The Witchers were not great tailors, unsurprisingly. Vesemir had created a lopsided clown outfit for Ciri to wear that didn't fit her at all. So, Triss gets to work on fixing her something more appropriate. But as Ciri takes off her clothes for the sorceress to work on, Triss notices that the girl is absolutely covered in horrible bruises. Tokens from her Witcher training, which made Triss swear viciously in Dwarvish. It became quite clear during their conversations that the Witchers had started training her like any other little Witcher boy. They had not anticipated girls. This becomes especially apparent when Ciri asks Triss to turn her into a boy, because, as she whispers in her ear, she was on her period, and it was a heavy, painful one, made even worse by the training.
At that, Triss exploded, yelling that she was going to kill those cursed idiots, and she ran downstairs to find the Witchers to tell them they were cursed idiots. The Witchers initially protest, but when Triss mentions that Ciri is on her period, they are all dumbfounded. They had no idea. Ciri had been afraid to tell them because she felt weak and in pain. And so, after Eskel pleads for Triss's help in the matter, Ciri comes downstairs in a beautiful blue dress, gifted to her by Triss, to inform the gathered Witchers that she is indisposed and will not be training today.
Ciri had already asked Triss to stay at Kaer a little longer, and Vesemir allowed it. also insisting that whenever Ciri put on a dress, there would be no training for the day. The next morning, Triss gave the Witchers a little extra advice on how to raise girls. Firstly, by not giving her so many secret body-enhancing herbs, so as not to cripple her hormonal system, and secondly, by not letting Ciri live in isolation for too long. But apparently, Geralt had already decided that Ciri would leave for the temple school in Ellander by spring. Ciri even looked forward to it. But now, they really did have to discuss Ciri's status as a source. Her uncontrolled powers were a problem, not only for those around her, but for herself. When a source did not learn to wield her powers, they could cause all manner of complications, among them catatonia. As they spoke, Ciri approached the table, reaching for the white seagull that induced a vision before. And Triss, wanting to see a vision firsthand, allowed her to drink some with immediate effect. Ciri grew rigid and cried out, smiling a broad, happy smile. She laughed and danced as Triss jumped towards her, magical amulet in hand. She would try to enter Ciri's vision to find out who was speaking through her. In Ciri's vision, Triss saw many things. A roaring sea, flowing grass, dark figures who slowly climbed Sodden Hill. Sodden Hill, where Triss had almost died. The dark figures were her friends, for whom there was no almost. This vision was again intended to intimidate Triss. She found Ciri watching the dark figures. Ciri, who had blood running down her arms, which she called the blood of elves. Lightning struck, and the world seemed frozen as the pair now stood at the edge of a bottomless chasm, lit by reddish smoke. Another thunderbolt revealed a long marble staircase leading into the depths of the abyss, and Ciri started speaking again. Ciri's face suddenly changed, hardened. Her voice became metallic, cold and hostile, resounding with threatening, cruel mockery. "You have come all this way with her, Triss Merigold, all the way here? You have come too far, 14th one. I warned you." "Who are you?" Triss shuddered, but she kept her voice under control. "You will know when the time comes." "I will know now!" The magician raised her arms, extended them abruptly, putting all her strength into a spell of identification. The magic curtain burst, but behind it was a second, a third, a fourth. Triss sank to her knees with a groan, but reality continued to burst. More doors opened. A long, endless row leading to nowhere, to emptiness. "You are wrong, 14th one," the metallic, inhuman voice sneered. "You've mistaken the stars reflected on the surface of the lake at night for the heavens." "Do not touch! Do not touch that child!" Ciri's lips moved, but Triss saw that the girl's eyes were dead, glazed and vacant. "She is not a child," the voice repeated. "She is the flame, the white flame which will set light to the world. She is the elder blood, Henneker, the blood of elves, the seed which will not sprout, but burst into flame, the blood which will be defiled when Tedderat arrives, the time of end, Vesderat epegan." Triss, unable to find the identity of the voice, wakes up next to Geralt and confesses that Ciri's powers are beyond her abilities. The Witchers would need to ask for help from a more powerful mage, like Yennefer. As Ciri's nightmares intensify after this vision, Triss stays with her during the nights, teaching her elder speech during the days. The Witchers taught her combat and theory on monsters and potions, until finally spring came, and they would leave for Ellander.
Their trip would not be without issue, however, as Triss got violently ill in the middle of it, and unable to find any help, they decide to join a caravan they come across, led by a bunch of dwarves. The dwarves were on a secret mission from Kedwin, and while Geralt knew the dwarves already, they hadn't really parted on the best of terms. However, Ciri gets along with them well, and so they keep on traveling.
Ciri and the dwarven leader, Yarp and Zigrin, bonded quickly over the fact that both their grandmothers used to give them a thrashing over any little thing. But they also speak of the Scoia'tael, and those conversations were less light-hearted. Geralt was famously neutral, and neither Yarpen nor Ciri agreed with that stance, although Ciri didn't really understand the Scoia'tael yet either. Non-human freedom fighters, largely elves, who attacked human caravans and yelled their slogans at the top of their lungs. Humans to the sea! As Yarpen and Ciri discuss neutrality and the cost of it, the dwarves around them get more and more nervous about possible Scoia'tael attacks. They had been in this forest too long, and when the Dunbanner arrive, elite Cadweni soldiers, they confirm that Scoia'tael units have been spotted nearby. For some reason, not too long after this meeting, Ciri decided that she'd gotten bored of carefully riding through the woods, and she sprints off like a demon, thinking that she's old enough, a whole 13 and a half, with a swift horse and a sharp sword. She's not afraid of anything, except she immediately hides when she realizes the Scoia'tael are nearby. A group of them creep past her as she's crouched down in the bushes, where Geralt finds her, and, as a form of educational punishment, he takes her to the ruins of Shadowed, an ancient elven palace destroyed by the elves themselves to prevent humans from building on their work, like they had with cities like Cintra. The Scoia'tael, Geralt told her, were here to gaze upon these ruins and the statue of one of their heroes. He explains to Ciri that being neutral does not mean being indifferent to the suffering of others. He simply wanted not to hate. As a reminder of this lesson, Ciri takes one of the beautiful flowers that grew here, pricking her hand on a thorn as she grabs it. Blood runs down her palm, and a flash of a vision passes in Ciri's mind. The dwarven convoy was under attack. They rushed back, and against Geralt's wishes, Ciri dashes into the battle to save Triss, eventually managing to drag her to safety. The fight was fierce, but when it was over, the dwarves realized that they'd been duped. The secret convoy was merely a test to see if Yarpen and his men were traitors. But this test had cost many lives. With these harsh lessons ingrained in her memory, they arrive at the temple in Ellander, Nenneke's temple, where Ciri would spend her time taking lessons from the priestesses, writing letters to Geralt from time to time. Very soon, however, Yennefer of Vengerberg arrives at the temple too. She was to teach Ciri magic, and their relationship certainly had a very rocky start. Ciri thought the sorceress was beautiful, but also terrifying, with a lovely smile. Ciri herself did not think she had any magical abilities, especially because the novices had convinced her that virgins couldn't do magic. But she was still persuaded to let Yennefer do some magical tests to make sure. When the long hours of study started to make Ciri's back ache, they would go outside together to run and jump for 2 days straight, and on one such day, Ciri wondered when she'd finally know if she could be a magician, to which Yennefer answered that she already knew Ciri had great magical potential, especially as they'd been having the current conversation telepathically the whole time. Their lessons eventually led to another vision. Yennefer took Ciri to the woods and induced a vision, just like Triss had before. But this time, Yennefer joined her, saw the terrifying visions of the future, and through her magic, put an end to them and the nightmares at last. Although that did not mean she'd lost her prophetic powers at all, nor any part of her magic. And so the days flow into one another, as Ciri learns more of magic, eventually also learning of the coming war, a war which she discusses with Yennefer. So, it's true after all. There is going to be a war. Is that why we have to leave? Let's not talk about it. Let's not worry too soon. Ciri sniffed. I've already seen a war, she whispered. I don't want to see another. Never. I don't want to be alone again. I don't want to be frightened. I don't want to lose everything again, like that time. I don't want to lose Geralt, or you, Lady Yennefer. I don't want to lose you. I want to stay with you, and him, always. You will. The magician's voice trembled a little. And I'm going to be with you, Ciri. Always. I promise you.
When Ciri and Yennefer leave the Temple of Ellander, they ride for Garstang on Thanedd Isle, where the conclave of mages would soon gather for some important deliberations. However, before setting foot in Garstang, they decide to stop in Gors Velen, a neighboring town. There, Yennefer visits a dwarven bank, where she hears that Geralt is apparently in Hirundum. Ciri hears this as well, and as Yennefer doesn't want her eavesdropping anymore, she sends her away to have a little fun in the town. She also gives her a magical amulet that can turn her invisible should she get into trouble. The two of them immediately try every type of food available in the market. Donuts, sauerkrauts, fritters, and so on. They walk by fortune tellers, where Ciri receives a vision of Fabio's future that's far more accurate than any fortune tellers could be.
They see idiots preach in the market square, and eventually they find a man claiming to have a basilisk on show. Except it was a wyvern, and not a basilisk. Something Ciri calls him out on, which leads to Ciri proving the creature isn't dangerous by standing directly next to the cage. A cage which breaks because it's impressively shoddy. And while Ciri manages to kill the creature, pinning the heroic deed on a nearby squire, using her magical necklace to escape unnoticed, she is found by two sorceresses from the nearby magic school, Aretuza. Because of the amulet, they assume she's a student who simply skipped class, and they won't hear any excuses until they've dragged her back to Yennefer to get the full story. They apologize to Yennefer for their mistake, but not to Ciri. Ciri, who is already annoyed enough when the ladies then start using her as a servant. In fact, she soon decides that she's had enough, packs her bags, and slips out through the back door to ride for Hirundum, where she hoped to find Geralt. On her way to Hirundum, feeling slightly lost, she's set upon by the Scoia'tael, causing Ciri to rush off in a random direction, getting even more lost in the process. As she peers into the distance, she sees a vision of Kaer in his winged helmet, panicking and speeding off again, only for visions of the wild hunt to appear before her next. As she runs, she accidentally finds herself coming into Hirundum and realizes that the things she feared were not there at all. Except, just at that moment, a bright ribbon appears in the sky, and the real riders of the wild hunt appear, not in the flesh, but one of their apparitions meant to strike fear in the hearts of men, and they were here for Ciri. It was only through sheer luck that Geralt heard her horse gallop into town, and as he jumped outside, Yennefer's portal appeared next to them. She was furious and immediately cast a spell to repel the hunt's phantoms. Ciri, out of breath and afraid to choose who to run towards first, Geralt or Yennefer, pretended to faint, so she didn't have to choose at all. The next day, Geralt and Yennefer talked it over, while Ciri and Dandelion eavesdropped, and they decided that they'd attend the banquet on Thanedd Isle together. During said banquet, Ciri was largely left to her own devices, seeing more strange visions at night, although not of the very terrifying kind. When she awoke from one such dream, Yennefer was beside her. She had come to take her to a secret meeting among mages. Yennefer took her to the various mages gathered, who were fighting over who sided with Nilfgaard and who hadn't, and right then, Ciri prophesied. She told them that the war had already begun. All hell broke loose. When Ciri awoke from her trance, she was choking on smoke, standing in a pool of blood. Yennefer immediately grabbed her hand, and they ran off towards the nearby stairs, the sorceress telling her to go down the stairs, find the horse there, and run. "Mistress Yennefer, no! I don't want to be alone!" "Ciri," said the enchantress softly, "I once told you that everything I do is for your own good. Trust me, I beg you. Now run for it." Ciri was already on the steps when she heard Yennefer's voice once more. The enchantress was standing beside a column, resting her forehead against it. "I love you, my daughter," she said indistinctly. "Run!" On the way down, people tried to stop her, of course. Rience, Vilgefortz's murderous crony, was there as well, as was Kaer. Kaer, Ciri's nightmare. But this time, Ciri did not run. She faced him and defeated him soundly. But when his helmet was removed, she realized that he was just a boy, not a nightmare phantom, and so she left him there, taking off with his horse. She ran for Tor Lara, the magical tower rumored to hold an extremely unstable portal. Both Vilgefortz and Geralt were hot on her heels, but it mattered little. She ran to the top of the tower and there found nothing. Not even windows, just a portal in the wall. She approached it, walked through, and it exploded. She was gone.
She was gone, but not safe. She found herself in the Korath desert, alone, hungry, and hurt. As you can imagine, it isn't very easy to find sustenance in said desert, and eventually even the little bit of magic she could muster ran out. She was on the brink of giving up when out of nowhere, a unicorn appeared. A young one, it seemed, that she called Little Horse. Little Horse abandoned her, it seemed, after only moments, and just when Ciri was about to drink her own blood in desperation, Little Horse returned, with hooves dripping with water.
Ciri followed the unicorn and at last found some water, but they would have to leave eventually, and so they traveled together until they ran into a horrid monster. A monster that, while defeated, managed to wound Little Horse severely. They carried on a while longer, but the monster had been venomous, and at last, Little Horse collapsed, unable to move at all. Ciri lamented that she was taught how to kill well enough, but no one taught her how to heal. She becomes so desperate in her attempts to heal her only companion that she decides to make a fire and use the fire vein created thus as a source for magic. Something Yennefer had always expressly forbidden, for fire sources were volatile, dangerous. Ciri was about to find out why. Without realizing it, she tapped into the power and floated up into the air, everything happening instinctively. She lifted her arm towards the unicorn and cast a healing spell without knowing how she did it, healing the unicorn immediately. Ciri cried that she now had the power, her newfound abilities clouding her judgment, screaming out spells and invocations that she didn't understand, nor had she ever learned them. It was unimportant to her. She was consumed by the power gifted by the fire. The flames themselves started whispering to her, a figure in the shape of Falca appearing before her. She told Ciri to take revenge on all those who harmed her, to make them pay, but the visions she showed Ciri were not only of her enemies. She saw her friends in shackles, on stakes, burning in pain. Triss, Nenneke, and eventually Yennefer, Vesemir, Geralt. As this continued, unicorns the size of war horses had gathered around the fire to watch Ciri struggle with the ghostly Falca, who now called Ciri Falca as well. "Let it burn, Falca! Let it all burn!" "Go away! Be gone! I don't want you! I don't want your power!" "Let it burn, Falca! Let it burn!" "I don't want to!" "You do! You desire this! Desire and lust seethe in you like a flame! The pleasure is enslaving you! It is might! It is force! It is power! The most delicious of the world's pleasures!" Lightning, thunder, wind, the thudding of hooves and the neighing of unicorns, galloping with abandon around the fire. "I don't want that power! I don't want it! I relinquish it!" She didn't know if the fire had gone out, or if her eyes had clouded over as she slumped to the ground, feeling the first drops of rain on her face. The unicorn surrounding her now decided that, while she might have been dangerous before, she had now given up her power and was no longer a threat. She could no longer do any kind of magic, and so they left her to her fate. When Ciri awoke, she was alone. The will to survive had vanished from her. She simply lay there, empty, until horses approached and the men upon them dragged her away like a rag doll, asking her aggressive questions. But she did not react. Nothing mattered to her anymore. Nothing. Not even the fact that the knight in command of the riders wore a helmet decorated with the wings of a raptor.
The men who had found Ciri were called the Trappers. They were crude, vile, loathsome types of men. But for the moment, they were kept under control somewhat because they were led by a Nilfgaardian. The Nilfgaardian knight was also loathsome, but a little less loathsome than the Trappers at least. Except when they were on their way to Nilfgaard to deliver Ciri to the Emperor, they ran into another Nilfgaardian knight. And this Nilfgaardian knight had a vendetta against Ciri's Nilfgaardian knight, so they duked it out, and both of them died. So this left Ciri in the hands of the crude, loathsome, horrifying Trappers.
They drag Ciri to a nearby tavern, where they intend to drink their fill and celebrate that they caught this very expensive little girl who they'd sell for a lot of money to Emhyr. At said tavern, they're met with another set of crude, horrifying, loathsome men who called themselves a rat. Not an animal, but a boy, Caeley. He was part of a gang called the Rats, and the Trappers tied up Ciri next to him while they went and got drunk. Ciri, now unable to use magic, is stuck here and relies on Caeley to get them out of this predicament. Caeley is also a terrible person, of course, but he does cook up a plan to get free, one that includes Ciri. Apparently, the rest of his rat gang is about to barge in to free him, and he needs to be ready, so he sends Ciri to finagle a knife from the innkeeper, allowing her to try and cut through their bonds. While the trappers and their friends discuss taking Ciri to the barn, I'll remind you that Ciri is only a child at this point, the rats do in fact burst through the window, and a very one-sided fight breaks out, where the trappers and their friends get butchered. Ciri also plays a part in this fight when she defends the still-bound Kayleigh from certain death. The rats, amused by Ciri's antics and apparent ability to avoid getting killed, give her a sword and tell her to fight the final remaining trapper. Ciri, still too innocent to kill anyone, avoids every attack but never finishes the fight, to the dismay of the rats. Regardless, they have to run. The town isn't thrilled with the recent bloodshed for obvious reasons, and so the rats take off on their horses, still trying to get Ciri to kill people during their getaway. They eventually succeed, causing Ciri to almost throw up when she kills a man who gets in the way of her escape. After they flee successfully, they try to figure out what to do with Ciri. She says nothing as they discuss amongst themselves until she eventually snaps and tells them that she doesn't care where they go, so they shouldn't care where she goes. She doesn't care about them. The awkward silence that follows is interrupted with a "let's go to bed." But before they do so, Ciri was sworn into the rats, each of them granting her a gift, and Ciri herself choosing a new name for herself. Gvalka, Elder speech for Falka. As they finally go to bed, Ciri is approached by Kayleigh with ill intent. Ciri tells him no, but Kayleigh continues anyway, only to be interrupted by a different rat, a girl called Missile. She chases Kayleigh off, but only to continue what he started on her own, as Ciri lies crying. In the morning, she leaves to wash herself, trying in vain to wash away the impossible, breaking down in tears again.
And so Ciri ran with the rats for a time, eventually even starting to date Missile consensually, as far as that's possible in her situation. She truly seemed to love her. However, Ciri herself had turned into something of a monster. She started murdering and looting and pillaging as much as the rest of her gang. And all this took place while, in the shadows, every organization was mobilizing to find and get Ciri.
Vilgefortz, of course, is still trying to find her through Rienz, but eventually other associates, so he can forcibly impregnate her and take her placenta. That same Vilgefortz had attempted to throw Emreis off the trail by giving him a false Ciri. But Emhyr would of course recognize his own daughter, and he still wanted to find Ciri so he could have an incestuous child with her. Meanwhile, the Lodge of Sorceresses, an organization newly formed by several powerful sorceresses, also wanted to find Ciri so they could send her off to Kaer to seduce the Koveri prince, Tancred, and have his baby, who would one day rule in the name of magic on the throne of Kaer. The Lodge also knew of the prophecies surrounding Ciri, and their version spoke of a queen of the world that would be born from her blood. The Lodge wanted that queen to be under the Lodge's control. But for now, Ciri is blissfully unaware of these events, until one day she makes a grave mistake. During yet another ambush orchestrated by the rats, they find a young girl in a coach. The young girl is the daughter of the Baron of Cassidy, a vengeful type. Ciri, in a fit of rage, demands the brooch the girl was wearing, and when word of this reaches the girl's father, he is outraged. So outraged, he sets bounty hunters on the rats. One of them, the famed Leo Bonhart. One day, when the rats are getting high on Fistek while getting tattooed, Ciri putting a rose tattoo on her inner thigh, matching the one Missile had, a man named Hotsporn rode in on a beautiful black horse to inform them of the happenings in the world. Hotsporn tells them quite a few things, like the fact that Leo Bonhart is in the nearby town of Jealousy, and that he's hunting the rats, but also that Fall of Cintra is set to marry Emreis, Emperor of Nilfgaard. This enrages the real Ciri, who gives away perhaps a bit too much of herself, and when Hotsporn eventually leaves, she decides to follow him so she can set the record straight. After a tearful goodbye to Missile, promising that she'll be back for her in a golden carriage, she catches up to Hotsporn. They travel together for a while, Hotsporn flirting with Ciri, who, may I remind you, is about 15 years old at this point. and Ciri wondering whether she should or shouldn't sleep with him. When they're attacked by bandits in the middle of their ride, they're forced to flee into the forest, Hotsporn getting wounded on the way. As he lay there dying, he told Ciri not to ride for the town of Jealousy, where Bonhart waited, making Ciri realize that he told the rats about Bonhart on purpose. He had lured them into a trap. Bonhart was expecting them. Still, Ciri decided that, what the hell, she'd sleep with this dying idiot, because she couldn't rightly get up in the middle of the bandits still out there looking for them. Or she absolutely would have, if Hotsporn hadn't died in the middle of things. But Ciri wasn't too upset about it. After all, this meant she could take his beautiful black horse, a magical horse, in fact, that she could call from anywhere through the use of a magical bracelet. She named her new companion Kelpie, and set out like a storm to Jealousy, hoping to catch the rats before they got there, to warn them, to warn Missel.
Unfortunately, she was too late. She arrived only just in time to watch Missel get cut down, and even though she tried to fight, she lost horribly. Leo Bonhart grabbed her by her hair and threw her down next to Missel, who was lying in her own filth, and Ciri had to watch her die.
This is when the most horrible ordeal of Ciri's life began. After being forced to watch Bonhart cut off the heads of her friends one by one, he stripped her naked in the tavern, beat her, put a collar on her, and dragged her around like a pet. However, he did not give Ciri to the Baron Cassidy, his original contractor. Nor did he kill her for Stefan Skellen's sake, who had also hired him. He intended to toy with her, because he'd had a hunch that she might be a witcher. So, despite the Baron's outrage, they rode to Fano to buy Ciri an exceptionally beautiful weapon, engraved with the word Cirel, swallow, in Elder speech. A blade which the weapons salesman gave Ciri for free, for mysterious reasons. Then they rode for Claremont to meet a man named Hauvenagel, a disgusting little man with even more disgusting little friends. Hauvenagel organized arena fights, and after forcing Ciri to sniff more fistek, they made her fight whoever had the guts to show up in the arena. Many tried and failed, confirming Bonhart's suspicions. A broken Ciri now attempted to take the sword to herself in the middle of the arena, but her hand faltered, and so she was dragged out by Bonhart again. He flogged her in a small cellar and threatened to pull her teeth out until she admitted who she really was. Their travels next brought them to the town of Unicorn, where Bonhart met Riens, Vilgefortz's lapdog, and Stefan Skellen, a man who used to work for Nilfgaard, but had switched sides to Vilgefortz instead. As Bonhart left to speak with the two, he had Ciri tied to a pole outside, as the townspeople ridiculed her. However, she was eventually left with very few guards. One of them was a psionic named Kenna. She possessed some modicum of the power. She could read minds, for example, and she attempted to do just that to Ciri. But Ciri, much to Kenna's surprise, managed to stop her. But in attempting to read her mind, Kenna had instilled some part of the power in Ciri. For a brief moment, Ciri could cast spells again, and she immediately took advantage of the situation by throwing her guards onto the floor in a bleeding heap. All her guards, except for someone called Neratin Seca. Unbeknownst to everyone, they were a spy, placed there by Vache de Rideau, the Nilfgaardian spy master. They were on her side. They cut her bonds, and as Ciri mounted Kelpie, she saw everyone in the village run outside to stop her. Thankfully, Neratin used their own horse to ride down both Bonhart and Skellen, immediately hurling themselves from the saddle on top of Bonhart to hold him down, only letting go when they were well and truly dead. But this had given Ciri enough time to put some distance between her and everyone else. Skellen, in a last-ditch effort, tossed a throwing star her way, which caught her directly in the face, but Ciri did not stop. Another tried to shoot Ciri with a crossbow, but was stopped by a Jedaiah Mekasser, a second spy, this time placed by Asiravar Anahid in league with the Lodge. Kelpie made an impossible jump, and Ciri was gone.
They never caught her, though that might be because the Wild Hunt was actively wiping out any trace of her, and there was also talk of a giant straw unicorn, but those tales are unconfirmed. Ciri wanders around for a while until she is found by a man called Visogota of Corvo, who nurses her back to health and even manages to stitch up the gigantic wound on her face, which leaves a nasty scar. But once Ciri is healed, she realizes she has to go, and together they figure out that she might have a chance of finding Tor Cirel, the sister tower to Tor Lara. If the first tower got her here, perhaps the other would turn her back. So Ciri packs her stuff, including a pair of ice skates. She blackens her eyes until she looks akin to a demon, and then she sets off.
Before traveling to Tor Cirel, however, she decided to kill a few sentries left by her attackers, much to the dismay of the local innkeeper, who rightly believes that their friends might now take vengeance on him instead. Ciri leaves, troubled by the thought, and rides for the tower. She knew that her pursuers would be waiting for her somewhere along the path, and so she set a trap for them first. Winter had come, and the lake in front of Tor Cirel was quite frozen. Ciri took the ice skates she packed, walked to the center of the lake, and put them on. As expected, her enemies followed close behind, looking for her footprints on the misty ice. Until these footprints stopped, and they heard the scraping of blades on ice. Only Bonhart had been smart enough to step off the ice before, not trusting the situation. The others were not so lucky. She painted the lake red with blood until only 5 remained. One of them, Rience. When he botched a spell and cracked the ice, dragging him and everyone else under, he was the only one unable to crawl out. Ciri happily took advantage of the situation by running over his fingers with her skates, cutting them clean off, spelling the end for Rience. But Ciri was not quite safe yet. There was still Bonhart to deal with, and as she clambered off the ice to her horse again, he was waiting for her. In a mad dash, they sped for the tower at the end of the lake. Except there was no tower. Thinking he'd won, Bonhart yelled in triumph. But then the fog before him swirled, and suddenly a unicorn danced on the ice, followed by the fog swirling once more, now revealing the phantoms of the wild hunt, sending his horse into a frenzy, breaking the ice beneath them. When Bonhart had finally clambered out of the ice, a tower had indeed appeared, and Ciri calmly entered through the tower door, disappearing. Inside the tower, visions appeared before her of her loved ones, until she found herself in a warm glade where she met the elf, Avallac'h, who had been expecting her. Ciri had not, in fact, fled to safety. She had fled into another faction who wanted her for her blood, the NL. Ciri's ancestor, Lara Dorren, had belonged to this race, and the NL still considered the fact that she had a child with a mere human to be an outrage. They felt that humanity had stolen their elven blood, because Ciri's blood, Lara Dorren's blood, had been engineered over many years, created to emulate the power of the unicorns. Yes, the unicorns, who could also travel through time and space, a power the NL desperately craved, for they were conquerors. Conquerors stuck in a single world because the Great Gate had closed. The unicorns that had once opened it for them now hated them for their bloodthirst and savagery. The NL needed Ciri. They needed her blood. And so their plan was to force Ciri into sleeping with their king until she'd had a child. A child the NL would keep. Only then would she be free to go. Ciri was a prisoner in this land. Once again, they only wanted her child, who they believed would be 1,000 times more powerful than someone like Avallac'h, an already extremely powerful mage. The elves treated her with disdain at best, aside from Avallac'h, who seemed mildly friendly with her. But it mattered little. Ciri had to escape, and so she agreed to sleep with King Oberon, who, when they first met, seemed more interested in discussing philosophy than childbirth. As the days went on, however, they did try again to make things happen, so to speak. But Oberon simply couldn't physically perform his part in the creation of a child. Eventually, Eredin, another elf, even tries to persuade Ciri to give Oberon a stimulant, which Ciri doesn't trust in the least. But things were getting dire. After their last failed attempt, Ciri and Oberon had fought. Vile things were said, and Oberon showed her untrue visions of Geralt and Yennefer's death, purely to torment her. The day after, Ciri took Kelpie for a ride, except It was rather the other way around. Kelpie would not let Ciri control her and ran at a mad gallop towards a stone formation Ciri had been forbidden to go near. And now she found out why. Unicorns gathered here. The unicorns had tried to telepathically reach Ciri before, telling her to use her powers to simply teleport out of here, but the elves had cut things short. Now they finally had time to talk. One of the unicorns was Little Horse, whose real name was Iorveth, and she asked her again to flee from this place. They would help her do so. Ciri agreed, but only if Iorveth left with her.
When darkness fell that night, Ciri knew it was time to go. However, she wanted to say goodbye to Oberon despite everything one last time. But when she entered his chambers, he was slumped in a chair in the corner, dying. He had taken Eredin's aphrodisiac, and it had proven too strong. She stayed with him until he was finally truly gone, holding his hand as she cried.
With little time left, Ciri now rushed towards the boats in the river and set off, letting the stream carry her, only to be interrupted by Eredin, who jumped into her boat. He seemed genuinely shocked when Ciri told him what had happened to Oberon, but did not let that deter him. After a short fight, Eredin gets unceremoniously knocked off the boat by an incoming bridge, and Ciri continues on until she finds Kelpie and Iorveth. But before they could well and truly leave, the unicorn had to show her something. He led her to a nearby ravine, where darkness reigned and something crunched under Ciri's feet. Lightning flashed, and Ciri could finally see what she'd been standing on. A sea of bones. Human bones! Ciri had already seen human slaves in this world, but the sight of this slaughter was too much for her. With no time to mourn, however, Ciri and Iorveth had to run for their lives, except nowhere in this realm would they be safe. So, the unicorn urged her to use her elder blood powers, travel through time and space to safety. Ciri focused and leapt away to another place and time. The Red Riders followed as best they could, and so Ciri kept traveling through portal after portal until the riders catch up to them. Desperate to keep Ciri out of their hands, Iorveth stayed behind to delay them while Ciri jumped through another portal. It was just her and Kelpie once again. So they wandered from world to world, time to time, accidentally bringing the plague to Nilfgaard, fighting off a cannibal, having dinner in France, until she teleported in front of a young girl named Nimue. Nimue, a young sorceress who would become obsessed with Ciri from that point on. Nimue, who would spend her days researching Ciri's journey until she managed to pinpoint when and where Ciri would next appear through a portal. Many years later, on the balcony of her tower, Ciri appeared before Nimue once again. Only this time, Nimue managed to guide her, opening the portal that led to the castle of Vilgefortz. And so, Ciri finally made it home. As she entered the castle, determined to free Yennefer, who had come here hoping to find Ciri, she was met with wry disappointment. Ciri had meant to trade her life for that of Yennefer, but Vilgefortz, cruel as he was, didn't much care for that. She was here now, within his power. He could have both. And as far as he was concerned, Bonhart, who was also present, could do whatever he pleased with her after Vilgefortz was done with her. He took Ciri to a tower chamber where an awkward chair waited for her. Here he would artificially inseminate Ciri and do whatever he needed to do with her. But before any of that could take place, Geralt and his band of misfits burst into the castle. As Vilgefortz went to deal with this new problem, he ordered Ciri shackled and locked away. But even that would not go according to plan, because a giant bat crashed through the window and started tearing the bandits apart. "Don't fear," he smiled, seeing her expression. "Don't fear, Ciri. I'm glad I found you. My name's Emhyr Regis. I am, although it may seem strange to you, a comrade of the Witcher Geralt. I came here with him to rescue you." An armed mercenary rushed into the blazing laboratory. Geralt's comrade turned his head towards him, hissed and bared his fangs. The mercenary howled horrifyingly. The howling went on for a long time before it faded into the distance. "Come with me, Cyrilla. I'll take you to Geralt." "No," mumbled Ciri. "You don't have to be afraid of me." "I'm not. she protested, bravely fighting with her teeth, which insisted on chattering. "That's not what it's about, but Yennefer is imprisoned here somewhere. I have to free her, as quickly as possible."
But Yennefer would have to wait a while. Ciri ran into Bonhart on her way there, and as she ran away from him, she also ran into Kaer and Angoulême, 2 friends of Geralt who had come here to save her. They both die in an attempt to keep her safe, and eventually, Ciri is forced to face Bonhart.
She stood her ground, and in the end, soundly defeated him, taking the 3 Witcher medallions he had taken from the Witchers he'd killed as he lay bleeding out in front of her. He lunged at her one last time, desperately, but she cut him down with one swift stroke. With Ciri defeating Bonhart and Geralt and Yennefer defeating Vilgefortz, they were finally free, or so they'd hoped. Now, Stefan Skellen's men charged at them, and both Geralt and Ciri were wary of battle. They cut through the bandits almost mechanically, until they were interrupted by Nilfgaardian soldiers filing into the hallway. Emhyr had arrived. He had come for Ciri. She would marry him, her biological father, bear his child, and that child would have another child who would be the ruler of the world, saving it from destruction. Geralt's anger that in doing what he was about to do, Emhyr was directly breaking the law of surprise that had promised Ciri to the Witcher, didn't matter to the Emperor of Nilfgaard. And so Emhyr left, asking Geralt and Yennefer to die with dignity as he took Ciri away. She and Yennefer hugged and whispered for a long time. Then Ciri went closer to Geralt. "Pity," she said quietly. "Things were looking more promising." "Much more." They hugged each other. "Be brave." "He won't have me," she whispered. "Don't worry, I'll escape from him. I have a way." "You may not kill him. Remember, Ciri, you may not." "Don't worry, I wasn't thinking about killing at all. You know, Geralt, I've had enough of killing. There's been too much of it." "Too much. Farewell, Witcher girl." "Farewell, Witcher." "Just don't cry." "Easier said than done." Ciri didn't want to go. She was angry, but she tried to be brave. She didn't want to cry. But when she looked behind her and realized that she would never see Geralt and Yennefer again, she broke down. Her eyes filled with tears, and seeing his daughter cry, Emhyr realized that what he was meant to do, he simply couldn't. He could not hurt his daughter so, and thus he left, sending Ciri back to her real parents, Geralt and Yennefer. The world now accepted the false Ciri that Emhyr would later marry as the real Ciri, and the actual real Ciri was free from political intrigue. Together, the 3 of them now took some time meting out justice. They rode to Jealousy, where the rats had died, and Ciri was captured by Bonhart to visit the graves of the rats that, to Ciri's surprise, had been laid to rest quite beautifully. She knelt in front of Missel's grave and wept, saying her final farewells. Next, they rode to Claremont, where they set Halvenagel's arena on fire. They took vengeance on the people in Unicorn. They visited Visigota's little hut in the swamps to lay his body to rest, and they rode for Dundare, where Ciri had killed the sentries and so upset the innkeeper. Their wild rides soon became a local legend, but all things must end.
One day, Yennefer was contacted by the Lodge, who told her to take Ciri to Monte Calvo, where the Lodge was gathered. Yennefer initially defied them, but Ciri stated that she wanted to go. So instead, Yennefer asked the Lodge to give Ciri and Geralt a little more time together, as she would go ahead. And so it happened. Geralt and Ciri visited Toussaint and found Dandelion there, but their time together would be short. Ciri had to leave quite soon, and told Geralt that she would meet him again in 6 days. In Rivia.
Once at the lodge, Ciri was informed of her expected duties, of course. Yet again, they just wanted to knock her up. The ladies were nothing but cruel to Ciri, and treated her like an object more than a person. Needless to say, Ciri was not quite ready to commit, and asked to visit Geralt as she'd promised. The lodge, miraculously, allowed it, but only if Triss accompanied them. But when Ciri, Yennefer, and Triss rode for Rivia, the town was on fire, and Ciri had felt that Geralt was dying. She rushed in, the sorceresses trying their best to follow, but she was too late. Geralt was dead. Even Yennefer, using her magic to the point of complete exhaustion, could not save him. Just when all seemed lost, and Ciri lamented giving up her power in the desert, Kelpie neighed loudly, and Iorveth emerged from the fog, running across the water. He approached Ciri, and as she touched his horn, he channeled the power through his horn to her, just like Kenna had once accidentally done. Ciri's eyes lit up with a milky glow as she was surrounded by a fiery halo. She raised her finger towards Geralt, and just like in the desert, a ribbon of pure light flowed from her fingers like lava, the healing spell that would save Geralt. The unicorn then summoned a boat and motioned for the group to put Geralt and Yennefer in the vessel, as Kelpie followed Iorveth into the mist, until they both disappeared. When all was said and done, Ciri stepped into the boat as well. "Apologize to the ladies of Monte Calvo, Triss," she said. "But it can't be otherwise. I cannot stay when Geralt and Yennefer are departing. I simply cannot. They ought to understand." "They ought to." "Farewell, then, Triss Marigold. Farewell, Dandelion. Farewell, all of you." "Ciri," whispered Triss. "Little sister, let me sail away with you." "You don't know what you're asking, Triss." "Will you ever?" "For certain," she interrupted firmly. And so she left that world, finding herself eventually in the world of King Arthur's England, where she runs into none other than Sir Galahad, who finds her bathing in the lake. He assumes that she is the fabled Lady of the Lake, which is not something Ciri can entirely get behind. As they sit down and eat, Ciri tells him of all that happened and notes that she might have confused destiny a bit in her own realm, so she would stay in this one for a while. When she finished her tale, Galahad invited her to ride for Camelot with him, to meet King Arthur, and as Ciri didn't have anywhere else to go, she obliged. Thus ends the tale of the books. Of course, Ciri does eventually return, after having met Avalach in one of her worlds. She would again be hunted by the NL, Avalach now seeming to be on her side at least. During their fight against Eredin's wild hunt, Ciri explodes in elder blood rage for the first time ever, like her mother had once done during her betrothal feast. And after running from enemy after enemy, Ciri decides to finally put an end to it all. She, Geralt, and anyone else she can find to aid her band together to face the wild hunt on their own terms, and they defeat them soundly. And for good measure, she passes through the Great Gate to punch the White Frost in the face as well, which is odd, because it's an actual ice age. I'll not discuss the various endings to her story here, but as far as what book Ciri would do, she would become a witcher once more, traveling the land to aid who she could, just like her father.
Hello, I bet you thought I'd forget about this, but I didn't. So the entire thing with Triss and Ciri's trance, when they get to Kaer Morhen, the reason I think it's Avalach is largely because there isn't that much evidence surrounding the entire event. And when you get into the trance, they also talk about the blood of elves, which is not something that Vilgefortz would really want to use, whereas the NL elves would definitely call it the blood of elves because they see the elder blood as their property. They feel that Ciri's blood, Lara Dorren's blood, is theirs. It was genetically created by them, so blood of elves. And they want it back, presumably. And it's doubly confirmed afterwards when they tell Triss to take Ciri back where she belongs. And that wouldn't really be Vilgefortz. And Vilgefortz also wouldn't really have any benefit at that point from Ciri going to the NL. If Triss did eventually want to go through the trouble of figuring out where she truly belongs, quote unquote, that wouldn't be Vilgefortz, that would be the NL. And Vilgefortz probably knows a little bit about the towers and how they work, but they definitely don't know all of it. I don't think anybody really does, because at some point, Ida, Emmy, and Francesca also have this conversation where they talk about various spies coming over and asking them questions about Tor Lara and Tor Cedel. And Ida actually says, oh, you know, all these humans asking questions about mysteries that the elves themselves have tried to unravel for years. That kind of denotes that the elves also don't really know how the towers work exactly, and they are directly linked to the NL, so if they don't know, then Vilgefortz wouldn't know, so he could never have known, I don't know, set a trap near Tor Cedel, where, you know, Ciri would eventually go back, and he could catch her. Like, that wouldn't be a thing. She would just go to the NL world. Secondly, there's the visions of the future, which Yeah, Avallac'h can see the future because he's an NL. He has various prophetic type powers. Vilgefortz doesn't. As far as anybody knows, he can't see the future, he can't see visions. Whereas Avallac'h at some point, while he isn't an actual prophet, obviously, not like Ciri, eventually at some point he meets Geralt and Geralt asks to see Ciri and he conjures up a vision on the wall and he tells Geralt to really think about Ciri, which he does, and then he sees some visions relating to Ciri. But eventually he also sees his friends. And they are dead. And it's very likely that, well, it might be just from the forest. It could also be related to their friends or his friends dying when they are trying to rescue Ciri. So technically that would be related to Ciri, but Avallac'h doesn't see it that way. So yes, he does do the future visions, but he seems to do them wrong at times. The visions that are in Ciri's prophecy at Kaer Morhen, a lot of them do not come true. So this one moment where Geralt sees a vision that is related to Ciri is also by Avallac'h kind of pushed aside. He's like, oh, that's not important. That's not Ciri. I'm not seeing Ciri in this vision. You ruined it. But it is related. He just doesn't realize because Avallac'h has tunnel vision. He's like, oh, Ciri isn't directly in this vision. That means you screwed it up. That means it doesn't really matter. But it does. It does. It shows the future. That includes Ciri. But, you know, Avallac'h doesn't care. And on the side of that, this is not necessarily Avallac'h related, Oberon shows fake visions to Ciri at one point, which, you know, Oberon was also someone I somewhat figured might be the one doing the visioning, because he is also an Ensevern. Don't forget that. Oberon is also extremely powerful. At some point in the NL world, Oberon is frustrated with Ciri, and so he shows her false visions of Yennefer drowning, of Geralt dying in the snow. And these are not real, but he shows them anyway to just get under her skin. So there's no reason why an NL wouldn't do the same thing when trying to persuade someone else to make Ciri go to them. Which is terrible, obviously, but yeah, again, Vilgefortz couldn't really be doing much of that. He's never shown to be doing that. I think if he could do that, he would have done it 1,000 times over just to torment people like Yennefer and maybe even Ciri as well. And yes, I know that in the vision they do say the star is reflected in the pond, etc. That saying, but that is a saying that is well known enough. Like it's not a Vilgefortz exclusive thing. In the books, yes, he says it often, but like in our world, we know this saying, and there's no reason why the incredibly stuck-up NL wouldn't use this exact same very stuck-up phrase that Vilgefortz uses. So yeah, my money is on Avallac'h. If not Avallac'h, maybe even Oberon. If it isn't a person, because that is also a possibility. If it isn't a person, then perhaps a deity of some kind, a malevolent one. We know Melitele and Freya, the same person, exist, so there might be others. It could be death itself. But again, there is no real evidence to suggest any of these things, so I'm going with Avallac'h. Okay, there you go. That's my theory. Merry Christmas.